Good day from Banjo Dunk Production Studio in Toronto, Canada. An audiobook podcast based on my book, My Good Times with Stompin' Tom. I'm your host, Duncan Fremlin from the band Whiskey Jack. Chapter 6, Tom Meets the Band. Tom told me many stories about the performers who came before him, those who paved the way for his career to succeed. He was very appreciative and honored those singers by writing songs about them. Tom's Tribute to Wilf Carter is my favorite, a brilliant piece of songwriting. Tom also influenced those of us who came after. Much of this book is about the role he played in my own success in music. There are two other great Canadian musicians, both alumni of the Whiskey Jack family, who were also touched by Tom and his music. Theirs is their story. Multi-instrumentalist Conrad Kipping, and guitarist and singer-songwriter Bob McNiven. Bob joined Whiskey Jack in our third year, 1980. His songwriting, strong vocal stylings, guitar skills, and sense of humor were important elements in our success over the years. He started singing as a young man in his family gospel band. I often tease him that he knows every gospel song ever written. He remained a vital part of our sound until late 2017, when he retired. I can't recall the exact date that Conrad joined the band, but it was sometime in the early 1990s. He blended into the Whiskey Jack sound perfectly. He's very good on his many instruments, in particular the guitar, mandolin, and fiddle. He's also a great singer with hundreds of tunes in his repertoire. He occasionally joins us on stage for fun and tunes. Bob and Conrad were Whiskey Jack's main singers on the 1993 Kick It, Keep It Canadian tour with Stompin' Tom. In 1992, Tom and Lena hosted a backyard barbecue beside the pond at their house. Because I had been Tom's road manager, I was invited and encouraged to bring along a few musicians. That was the first time I got to jam with Tom with my band. It was quite a thrill for all of us. Bob and Conrad went on to play vital roles in Tom's music for years to come. Tom warmed to these fellows immediately, and it didn't hurt that they could sing many of his songs. Besides the 1993 Whiskey Jack tour, Bob continued to play with Tom on other tours, and appeared on the Conan O'Brien show years later. As Bob recounts it, his first day on the road was a sign of things to come. The PA truck backed up to the beer store's loading dock on Dufferin Street in Toronto. The door opened, and out drove a forklift with an entire skid of cartons of Moosehead beer. I asked Tom what this was all about, and he said, "They don't sell it west of Ontario, so I have to take my own stock." Memories of years before with Molson Golden. There's an army of musicians who have played with Tom over the years, and we all agree it's the crowds that most impress us. As Bob recounts, standing beside the stage in Brandon, Manitoba one night was a man, perhaps in his early 30s. He was holding up a small child so the kid could watch Tom perform. The dad had a look of total respect on his face, and the child was fascinated with Tom. It was as if he wanted his child to share the Tom experience as he had when he was a young man. When Bob, Conrad, and I get together to reminisce about the 1993 tour, one memory that always comes up was the few days off we spent on the island, Prince Edward Island. We anticipated that the 3-day visit was going to be charged. This was the homeland for all things Stompin' Tom. It's where he spent his most formative years, in Skinner's Pond as a youngster. In later years, he bought property there and visited often with his family. This particular visit was going to be a big deal, and it began with the ferry ride on a sunny but cool autumn day, as Bob describes it. About 20 big guys dressed in black and denim with Harley-Davidson motorcycles followed us onto the ferry. On their backs were the ever-so-familiar Hells Angels logo. Word spread that Stompin' Tom was on the ferry, so they walked over and introduced themselves to us. One fellow was particularly nice and befriended us. They were on their way to Charlottetown for a big Angels fundraiser at their clubhouse and asked if we'd like to join them. The clubhouse was an old gas station, and when we arrived, we were greeted by 3 large bikers standing at the door. We asked for the guy we met on the ferry and were told to wait. Soon he appeared and told us we were welcome to come in, have a beer, enjoy ourselves, but under no circumstances were we to look at any of the women. This was because he was our sponsor, and if we got out of line, he would have to answer for us. He said, "If I catch hell from them, you'll catch hell from me." We had on our tour jackets with the words Stompin' Tom Tour emblazoned on the back and our names etched on the arms. I was never sure when it was appropriate to wear the jacket in public, but in this case, it seemed like a good way to ingratiate ourselves to our hosts. It worked. We were welcomed and immediately invited into the back room, where stimulants were on display. There was an offer of a trade, stimulant, cocaine, for your jacket. Given our show was going to be the next night, this trade was fraught with peril, and we declined. The last thing we needed was for a big and burly Hell's Angel to walk into the theater in full color and stand in front of the stage with his lady wearing one of our tour jackets. How would we explain that to Tom? It would take an uncomfortable series of lies to fix it. We wouldn't have been able to say, "Well, Tom, it's like this. We traded the jacket for a few lines of cocaine. Sorry we didn't share any with you." No, that would not have gone over very well. If one marijuana seed was reason for dismissal on a Stompin' Tom tour, a line of cocaine would have been fatal. The contract we were asked to sign before we agreed to the tour had one clause that was annoying but non-negotiable. One band member had to be available to stay up all night with Tom until approximately 5 a.m. if Lena, his wife, was not available. We all dealt with this in our own way. Bob. It was my turn to be up with Tom all night. Tom and I would trade songs, original tunes that neither of us performed in the show. We did this many times. We accompanied each other with our guitars, and he was very complimentary and also inquisitive, often asking, "What's that chord?" or "How did you do that?" He was interested in my opinion of his material as well. As far as his own compositions were concerned, Tom was very humble and genuinely wanted to know what I thought. It was quite an honor. Conrad. When we first met to rehearse for the Peace Tower show on July 1st, 1993, Tom went around the room and asked everyone where they were from. When he learned I was from New Brunswick, my dad was an RCMP officer and I'd been all over the country, that's when we really clicked. Stayed up all night with him. Being from New Brunswick and living all over the country was the tie that fed our friendship. When you travel all over the country, you do see it differently. At that 1993 show at Parliament Hill, Conrad remembered. They had a great big Steinway piano in the Confederation room that I got to play. We spent a lot of time there waiting. But the clearest memory was the floating feeling when we walked off stage. I couldn't feel my feet. When we were waiting for the ferry from Manitoulin on our way to a show in Wyerton, we got our instruments out and had a jam on the side of the road. A few people gathered round. Tom got out of his truck and walked over to listen to us play. Someone asked him to sing "Around the Bay and Back Again," his famous song about the ferry, Chichiman. We were lined up to board. It would have been very cool and kind of romantic if he would have treated the crowd by singing the song. But Tom shook his head. No. He just stood there with a big smile on his face, cigarette in hand, gray hat on. We got to Wyerton late that evening, checked into another rundown motel. By the time we arrived, the crew from Rocklands Entertainment had organized a huge bonfire in the backyard, and soon we were sitting with our instruments in hand, feeling the heat. That turned into another all-night pickin' session with Conrad and Tom trading trade songs for hours. It was times like this that Tom really shined. I've often wondered if Lennon and McCartney sat around their living room with friends jamming on tunes, just for the fun of it. Tom enjoyed his stage shows, but it was these informal, sitting around the hotel room picking tune sessions that really turned him on. He could go on indefinitely. That's what he really loved. He devotes many pages in his 2 autobiographies to impromptu jam sessions, pretty much anywhere there was a guitar and a case of beer. In this respect, he and Conrad were brothers in arms. They just liked to play and sing, and between the two of them, they knew hundreds of songs. It was easy to get caught up in their enthusiasm. According to Conrad, in Tom's furnace room one night, they were sitting around talking about his very first album, Tragedy Trail. I sang the title track for him, Conrad remembers. He was visibly, beyond the fact that he cried, he was visibly moved. "Oh, you know that song?" he asked. He told me the story about it. He and stevedore Steve Foote were on the road before the Maple Leaf Hotel, and they were stuck somewhere in northern Ontario hitchhiking in the summer, and the flies were wild. He actually contemplated suicide. That's when he wrote Tragedy Trail. Tragedy Trail, Tragedy Trail. You taught the wind how to whimper and wail. You taught me to cry, now teach me to die. Tragedy Trail. They were stuck near some train trestles for days, Conrad says. He told me about coming down from Timmins to Toronto, financing that whole album by himself with no backup musicians. It was the only album he ever did where it was just him and his guitar. He used all his money. I tried to get him to record another album just like that, him and a guitar. Johnny Cash had just done one. I took it up to him and said, "Look, Johnny's done one. I think it'd be great if you do one, just you and your guitar, like your first one." He wouldn't have anything to do with it.